FDM supports, the bane of existence for many FDM printed miniature enthusiasts. Tricky to place, hard to remove, and often impossible to clean up. And while tree supports have been a huge game changer in the FDM space in recent years, there might still be a better option. Resin. No, not resin printing, just the resin style supports. This is something that had been attempted back in the ye olde day of FDM miniatures on YouTube, with limited success due to the technology of the time. But with the improvements to both the hardware and the software in our hobby, and with the overwhelming stream of knowledge that now exists within our community, I reckon it's time to give it another go. Today we'll be looking at a few different things, starting with the innovation of pre-supported Advanced FDM miniatures, how we can go about speeding up the print time of said Advanced FDM miniatures, and then we'll even be taking a sneak peek at how you will soon be able to convert almost any pre-supported model into an FDM ready miniature in a few simple clicks. I'm Jacob from Painted for Combat. This is going to be a good one. I have had my eye on this idea for the last several months, starting when Tias over at Arbiter Miniatures began work on his Advanced FDM miniatures. And between Tias's own explainer video and the recent coverage over on Once in a Six Sides channel, you have very likely seen these by now. Miniatures that have been carefully split and meticulously pre-supported with FDM printing in mind, using, you guessed it, resin style supports. Beefier and less abundant than you would see on a typical supported for resin model, but resin supports nonetheless. And even though I'm personally printing out of spec, so to speak, in other words, not using the recommended filament or printer settings, I'm still getting some damn good results. For anyone that's curious, I'm using my own custom 0.08mm profile for the A1 with the 0.2 nozzle, and I'm just using Bamboo Labs basic PLA. But there's one big issue that I have with this process: the print times. Typically when we're printing an FDM model, the support material will print faster than the model itself. That's because the supports don't need to look pretty, they just need to be functional and hold the piece in place. However, for these advanced FDM models, we're printing the miniature and the supports at 0.08mm layer height with some of the highest quality, lowest speed settings these printers can pull off. And yes, we are doing this for good reason, so that we can pull the most detail possible out of an FDM machine for these tiny miniatures. But we do not need to be printing the support material with that same amount of care and attention. So, is there a way around this? A way that we can print these custom supports a little bit quicker than the Mini itself? Yes, I reckon there just might be. Let's open up one of these models and split it, so that we can edit the support settings separately. To do this, I'm going to right click and go split into objects, and well crap, that's not going to help. What I want to be able to do is have two objects that make up my model. Firstly, the Mini itself, and secondly, the resin support structure. Unfortunately, when we try and split this model up in Orca, all that happens is it splits the supports into hundreds of little pieces and drops them to the build plate. Unhelpful. But there is a solution. And don't be scared by me opening up Blender. This is not a process that you will have to manually do on your own. You'll see what I mean by that here in a moment, just bear with me. The solution to our problem is to pull this model apart. I'm splitting this model up, much like we did in Orca, into its hundreds of various pieces. Then I'm going to pull out the Mini and stitch the rest back together. And now, if I export these two pieces and drag them into Orca at the same time, it will give us the option to import a single model with two parts. Now moving over to the Objects tab, we can see that our model actually contains two pieces. And from here we can edit the print settings of the support separately to the model, allowing us to increase the speed. But I want more customization. I want to be able to change the layer height of our supports, independent from the model, so that we're only having to print supports every second layer. But if we now go ahead and split our model to get access to those additional settings, once again, the Mini itself is dropped to the build plate, and this won't work. So what I'll do back in Blender is add a small cube, just a single flat layer of material to the bottom of the Mini, sitting at the same height as the base of the supports. So now if we import, yes, split to objects, we can see that our Mini is no longer being dropped, because that cube is now the lowest point on that model. And now we can control all of the support settings separately. And the best settings that I've found so far have been changing the layer height to twice the normal so that it's printing every second layer, which in my case will become 0.16, setting all of the line widths to 0.2, and all of the speeds to 50mm a second. And voila! Just those few small changes take our 6.5 hour print down to 3 hours and 12 minutes. Not bad. That's not that far off from what this model would have taken with FDM tree supports, and this print is going to look so much better with these artfully pre-supported models. The supports don't look pretty, but they don't have to. The model has still printed pretty much perfectly with the same high level of detail we would expect. I also tried supporting some of my own minis, measuring up some of the Arbiter mini supports in Blender and plugging those sizes into Chitubox, but after many subpar prints, hard to remove supports, and several hours of trying to manually support these models, a thought dawned on me. Could we not just try and use the pre-supported resin models? Now yes, resin pre-supported models won't always have the best orientation for FDM printing. So if you can figure out and dial in your resin support settings to manually support models a little better for FDM printing, you might be able to get better results. If you want to see a more in-depth dive into that process, you can check out Once in a Six Sides video in the card and in the description. But keep watching, because you might not even need to go down that road if you don't want to. Alright, on to our first test using resin pre-supported files. And for this test, I'm going to be using a model that I would hate to support manually. This is a Vampire Paladin from Bite the Bullet, a model that would be a nightmare to print with FDM tree supports, and a model that I really do not want to resupport with FDM-sized resin supports. Bringing this into Orca Slicer, we can start to see our first issue. Even with a 0.2 nozzle, the support tips are too thin for the slicer to pick up. And even if we use the Arachne slicing method, I don't think that these connections would ever be sturdy enough to actually support the model during the print. So, back into Blender. And again, don't worry, I'll show you how we can automate this very soon. Split the model, pull out the mini, merge the supports back together, and now what I'm going to do is add a solidify modifier to these supports. This will give us a slider that will allow us to beef up the supports, and we only want to do this just enough for the slicer to pick them up. I've found 0.05 to be a great starting point and the perfect number for the Bite the Bullet models. For this first test, I won't speed up the supports yet, just while we're making sure that everything is actually working. And even though it took 15 hours, we have a damn good looking print. Fingers that never would have survived printing or support removal with tree supports, a sword that would have been an absolute mess if not for the resin supports, and unscarred overhangs over most of this model. Aside from the small bits of material left with the supports disconnected, something that you'll be familiar with if you've ever done resin printing, this is a near-perfect FDM Mini. And this isn't even from the A1! This came off of my much older Neptune 3 Pro. So let's try this again on one more model, and this time we'll increase the support speed to see if it works, taking this Vampire Assassin from a 7.5 hour print down to 4 hours and 12 minutes. And holy shit, it worked. You cannot tell me this hair or these swords would have ever printed this well with tree supports. But this whole process is becoming a bit tedious with a few too many manual steps for my liking. Import the model, split it up, merge it all back together, solidify the support material, add a cube, drop that cube to the bottom of the supports. That's just way too many manual steps to do for every model you want to convert. And a tutorial for that process would be the most mind-numbing thing to record or to watch. So instead, let me introduce to you Resin to FDM, a tool that I'm currently creating inside of Blender to streamline and turn this annoying process into a series of super simple button clicks, so that you can do this whole process without hardly needing to know Blender at all. How about that? So then, let's take it from the top, shall we? With our tool open, we will clear the scene. Now we can import our model, split that model into all of its pieces. From all of those bits, we're going to select the miniature, and now we can assign that as our model. Down here we can now choose the thickness to add to our supports, hit the Add Thickness button, double check that that looks all good, and then we can apply it. And finally, we can generate that cube on the build plate. And this process works just the same for an Arbiter Minis model. You just want to skip that thicken step and you're off to the races. You have no idea how excited I am by this. My A1 has been running non-stop with 0 issues printing models using this method. And even prints that should have been frankly impossible are somehow kind of succeeding. And even my much older Neptune 3 Pro has been able to pull off some crazy detail with this method. Like, this mini from boot to head is 1 inch tall. Come on, that's crazy! And it doesn't stop there either. I'm also working on an expanded version of this tool for my patrons that will allow you to also alter the thickness of the support tips separately from the rest of the support structure, so that you can really beef up those towers for safe printing while still maintaining a well-sized connection point to the model. So if you are at all interested in this Resin to FDM tool, please leave a like and drop a comment down below so this video can reach more people. I'm hoping to get a follow-up video out in the next 3 or 4 days, dropping a full tutorial with download links for the tool, so subscribe and turn on your notifications to make sure that you know about that as soon as it drops. And if you want to further support what I do, my Patreon is the single best way to do so. Not only will patrons be getting access to the advanced version of this tool that I'm working on, but there's already a ton of awesome goodies over there for patrons to grab. Starting at just a couple of bucks, you can get access to the community Discord, which is also the home to the download page for all of my printer profiles that you see here on the channel. And the higher level tiers also get access to monthly FDM ready bases, like this month's release, Rocky Outcrops. These are sculpted bases designed specifically to work on FDM printers with no supports required. And where possible, they're sculpted in a way to reduce the amount of visible layer lines on the final print. And exclusively for the month of March, we have some incredible FDM-ready terrain pieces, kindly donated by Forbidden Prints. So, whether you're interested in the Discord and my printer profiles, or you want to pick up all of those awesome FDM-ready STL files, check out the Patreon down below. And this tool doesn't just work for small models. I wanted to print something a bit larger just to test it, so I went ahead and converted this Frost Salamander for D&D using the Resin to FDM tool, with no issues at all. And taking one look at this, I can tell you that printing the mouth and the teeth on this mini cleanly would have been frankly impossible with tree supports, unless you maybe decided to orient this print in a way that it looked nasty on an FDM printer. And look at how easy these supports were to remove, like butter. And yes, before you ask, here is a Trench Crusade Mini, converted in the exact same manner and printed up in all of its glorious detail. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that these are perfect. I don't think FDM ever will be, but shit, they're pretty close. And I think more importantly to me, this process is actually replicable. You see, my tree support settings, they work great for me. But settings can only get you so far. I know that a lot of people still have issues with generating those supports or removing the material after the print. But something like this feels much more accessible, much easier to replicate for anyone, without the need to worry about perfect tree support placement or settings. And shit, if they're looking this good, it might just be the way to go. Between my A1 using Bamboo's basic PLA, and my much older Neptune 3 Pro with Elegoo's basic PLA, these have been the results. And the fact that these prints came off two quite different machines makes me rather confident that this will be a way more replicable process for so many more people. And the fact that a lot of these prints took way less effort than tree supports often do, well, that's a nice little bonus as well. So if you are at all interested in this process, make sure to subscribe and keep your eye out for that Resin to FDM video that'll drop later this week. And be sure to watch this space for all things FDM printing and tabletop miniatures. Be sure to like if you liked, but most importantly, thank you so much for watching. And as always, have a good one.